Okay, it'll take just a second. We're going to let the rest of us get joined in here. Okay, so welcome to the assessment in the time of COVID-19 session. My name is Megan. I'm going to be the moderator for this session. Before I introduce our presenter, I just wanted to go over a few household items with you. Please note that we are in a Zoom meeting. You have both video and audio microphone capability. We ask if you can please keep your mics muted unless you're interacting with us in some way. We will have time for questions and answering throughout the presentation as well as at the end. If you have questions or comments, please try to utilize the chat room. You will have the ability to post reactions. You can do thumbs up, etc. through your video. Please feel free to use these as appropriate. And thank you for being with us. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Janie Skinner.
Hi, welcome everyone. Happy Friday morning. I want to say that the title that appeared in the program was a little different than what I had intended, but it's fine, which is what assessment and data. What was the title that was posted, Megan?
Sorry about that. The SLO symposium. Oh.
Yeah, something about just generally SLOs and assessment and data, which is totally relevant to this. But this presentation is specifically around a little inquiry that we did at City College of San Francisco around assessment in the time of COVID-19. So I hope that that is a nice surprise to you all and not a, not a negative one. It does match the description of the session that was available. So I just want to say I'm here. I'm Janie Skinner. I'm one of our SLO coordinators at the college. We work as a team. I'm a faculty member in health education. Andrea Niosi is also here, and she's also on our SLO team. So one of the questions we had in the spring, as the pandemic became more acute, we were anticipating, what kind of size of impact this would have on us. Was it going to be something relatively brief? Was it going to be profound? Were we going to have major losses to deaths within our community? Were we not, right? I think you all remember what that was like in March. We didn't know yet. So at that time, we decided to take up a little bit of a mini inquiry around assessing learning in the time of COVID. What could we learn from our practices as we adapt to the situation that we were in? This presentation, I'm going to go over basically 4 areas: why we did this, how we did this, what we found, and some question and answer time, both chance for you to ask us some questions, and we have a few questions for you about how this time has played out at your college. If you have questions as we go along, please feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to mostly save questions till the end, but if it's something that's just like, can you say that again? Or I don't know what you mean by that word. Like, I don't want you to be confused. So I'd be happy to answer questions for clarity as we go. So the first part, why did we do this project? And let's see here. So, our research sort of emerged from seeing an opportunity and having some questions, like much research does. Because in the spring, based on the amount of work we knew that faculty was going to would have to engage in to switch to remote learning for those who weren't already teaching online, and because of the impacts we were anticipating of the pandemic itself. My field is public health, so I was very much aware that we could be facing high rates of illness in a densely populated community like San Francisco. We decided to waive for the spring semester and the summer semester our usual requirement for routine reporting on SLOs. Our college reports every semester for every section of every class with an assessment for every student. So it's not a small amount of work for faculty, especially those with larger classes, to go through and rank for each student. Did they meet the SLO that's being assessed that semester or not? So sort of, while we value that data very, very much, it's the basis of our institutional assessment plan, we felt that the emergency situation was such that we wanted to take one thing off of faculty's plate. So that also for us as coordinators, that meant we weren't going to be answering as many questions about routine reporting. Maybe we had a little time to look at what innovations were emerging for faculty in this time. And we started with a really long Google Doc of questions we had, but we also recognized we had very modest resources, like no financial resources other than our time to dedicate to this. So that what we would wind up with was sort of exploratory more than definitive data for our questions. How we approached this was to coordinate and meet with our college's Office of Research and Planning, and also consult with our SLO committee, which is a committee of the Academic Senate. We broke down what we wanted into some quantitative data and largely qualitative data. So for the quantitative data, we worked with the Office of Research and Planning to distribute a survey to all faculty at the beginning of June, so shortly after grades went in, and at a time we weren't competing with other surveys that they needed to administer. And we asked faculty about the routine SLO assessments at the section and student level we usually do. As it was optional in the spring, we asked things like, did you report? Did you not report? Why? Why did you report? Why did you not? What were some of the factors that influenced your decisions? All right. We also prepared some questions that we distributed to the chairs of departments, asking them to discuss them in their Flex Day discussions. And this is something we've done in the past for our institutional level assessments. And for this time, we only had 7 departments that reported their results of that discussion. We asked them to report it into a Google form, which is relatively small. That's, maybe 12, 13% of our departments. And I think that's partly because we weren't anticipating that this was also the first time departments were meeting on Zoom. So there was a lot of new things that people were having to deal with, as well as, continuing the return to the remote, having problems with registration for non-credit, all sorts of things that were high on the priority for departments to discuss in August. So we got some data from that, but not a lot. We also held a Flex Day workshop, an hour-and-a-half workshop, to discuss teaching and learning during COVID-19. We didn't frame this as a SLO discussion or an outcomes discussion, but more an open discussion with a couple of key questions around how are they adapting their teaching, how are they assessing learning, and how are student support services changing in the time of COVID-19. And this wound up being our richest source of qualitative data. We had, I think, about 35, 40 people at that discussion. So it was really great. We were able to record it and analyze that data. What we found. So our full report is at this site, which is a long site to link to. Let me say, you can also just go to ccsf.edu/SLO, and there you'll find a link to our mini site. Our mini site has all the reports posted on it. Essentially in January, we transferred to a new website. So we're still building out some of the normal things on our website. So that's why we have this Google site as an interim place to store some information. In our analysis of the data, we found that 5 key themes emerged: equity, a focus on outcomes, adapting assignments, varied views on the routine SLO reporting, and connecting to students in new ways, both as faculty and as student services providers. So I'll share a few highlights from each of those 5 areas. Equity was one of the main themes that emerged every time we talked with folks. Some of the equity concerns were about the unequal impacts, that's an equity gap, an opportunity gap on different populations. And these are not just, this was across different kinds of equity groups. It included credit versus non-credit. It included people who speak English as their first language and people who don't speak English as their first language. It included those with the economic means and the familiarity with technology, as well as, so it was ethnic, it was, or racial, it was economic, it was language, it was also ability and disability. These were all some of the things that came up. and age as well, especially our older adult students may have had extra barriers. So the kinds of barriers that these different groups experienced often was that access to technology was limited. Both, did they have laptops? Did they have access to Wi-Fi? I was teaching a fully online class in the spring, and you would think online students already have access to technology, but a lot of my students relied on going to the library or a cafe to access Wi-Fi. And so here we were in March in heavy rains and cold weather, and they're standing outside the library under an overhang trying to get on the internet because the libraries are closed, right? Baseline familiarity. So even when students were given hotspots or computers from the school, did they know how to use them? Once they got into Canvas, did they know where to go in Canvas, right? Family and community directly impacted by COVID-19. So for example, I had a student who said, I'm very lucky, my job hasn't changed, but my cousin lost her job, so she and her husband and her 5 children have moved in with me and my 2 children in my 1-bedroom apartment. So there were a lot of impacts of COVID-19 on students, even if they had access to the technology, right? And these impacts were the, schooling children at home, loss of jobs, sometimes additional hours at jobs for students who were paramedics or who worked for Amazon, who were, depending on their job, they might have had more work. And this was very disproportionate around our city. Some places were more affected by this than others. And then, of course, the health impacts itself. We had students who were taking care of people who were ill and who were mourning those who died. And we had a number of students who were sick themselves. So the effects of the economic downturn, that goes again to the economic pressures, and also for some students, extra work hours or unpredictability of work hours. Attrition. A lot of faculty spoke about students who disappeared and never made it back to class. And I want to note too that for some populations, they found greater ease in the shift to remote student learning. 1 or 2 faculty members mentioned, for example, that ESL students who might want to take English language learners who want to take more time to frame what they want to say. In some ways, posting to a discussion board in Canvas was easier for them than inserting themselves in a live discussion in a classroom. And I'll say too that our college varied a lot in how much we did things on Zoom. Some classes kept their full hours on Zoom. Most classes kept some time on Zoom, but less than their usual meeting time. And some classes went to 100% asynchronous, right? So different experiences across that. Some of the actions that came up that faculty engaged in to support equity, one was just a lot of flexibility, sometimes changing the form of an assignment or changing the due dates. Student engagement in co-creating assignments and rubrics. So inviting students in this time to say, what do you think defines success on this assignment? And let's create the rubric together. Connecting students to services. We can't, do that soft handout of walking the student from our office down to the counseling office, but we could send an email connecting the two. We could try to get people on the phone together. We could let students know about the services, and we could invite service providers into our Zoom sessions if we had them to talk about how to access student health or the library or counseling in this time, as well as basic things like food and rental assistance. A lot of personal outreach to students. Many faculty talked about this, getting on the phone if they could, sending emails, scheduling different ways of talking to students about the situation. And I want to say it doesn't come down to faculty alone bridging these gaps. It's really not enough if the faculty were spending, 6 hours a day trying to address these unequal impacts. It still wouldn't be enough because we need systemic responses, both as a college and as a local city and county government, as a state and as a nation. Many of these gaps were bigger than things an individual with good intentions can bridge. Many faculty also spoke about how useful it was to focus on SLOs or learning outcomes when they had to adapt their classes for new remote delivery. Most of our faculty on the survey reported using the SLOs when redesigning their course for their move to remote. And from discussions, we heard comments like that the SLOs help faculty focus on what's most important. If I have to ditch some of my content, I want to keep content that's going to build towards those SLOs, or maybe thin down the content, but still get there. Faculty also said it provided transparency for students. Some faculty spoke about putting what SLO an assignment reaches right in the assignment, so students know I'm working towards this competency. And for CTE areas where they're meeting not just the course SLOs, but also say the professional competencies they will be tested on for admittance to the field, listing that as well. And many people spoke about redesigning assignments to assess the same SLOs in new ways. So this flexibility, I can tell you for my own class, my second paper, I usually assign in the second half of the class, I gave students the option to do it as a paper, do it as a video, or do it as a PowerPoint presentation, as long as they showed that they knew the content and the critical thinking abilities that were linked to that SLO. And they loved that. I'm going to keep doing that even when we're not in a crisis. People adapted assignments and assessments, like I just mentioned. One of the big areas was changes to testing. And I'm sure in your colleges, there was a lot of discussion of this too. If a test is no longer proctored, in person, time limited, where you can see whether a student is pulling out their notes or their book, essentially all tests become open book, open notes tests. So for some faculty, that meant they wanted to change the kind of questions they ask. For some faculty, it meant keeping tighter time limits, still keeping the class, say the test to 75 minutes, with exceptions for students with disabilities. For others, we switched to asking more essay type questions and giving longer time. Many new uses of technology, faculty really liked using the studio aspect of Canvas, being able to make videos. Even, for instance, a ESL student teacher teaching first level ESL, very basic, where he thought technology is not going to help my students. He found his students loved being able to replay the videos he made. He could make short videos teaching the alphabet or teaching sentence construction, and students could play them over and over again. So he was really excited about technology. A lot of flexibility for students. So sometimes this changed from going a synchronous class to asynchronous, or changing deadlines or giving options. Many faculty were impressed with the high quality work they got from students. Some even said they found better work, that students seemed to have more time to focus on a project and go in depth than they had when they were doing lots of smaller homework assignments. And we must acknowledge there was an enormous impact on faculty workload in this switch to remote. And even for faculty like me, who was already teaching online, there were changes I had to make to my course, but particularly for faculty who weren't even using Canvas yet in a tech enhanced mode for their classes, it was a big lift to get us to the point where faculty had some basic training, began building out their Canvas shells, and began teaching remotely through Canvas, Zoom, and sometimes using additional technologies, whether Padlet or VoiceThread, or sometimes using WhatsApp or something like that for communicating with students who were less technologically connected. This was a quote from a faculty meeting. The shift to online has more broadly raised questions about what quality assessment is. How can we generate more valid and useful data through our assessment efforts? How can we structure ongoing pedagogical inquiry among faculty, share and troubleshoot best practices, generate good data to observe and respond to students' needs, experiences, learning styles, culture, etc.? So the process really spurred a lot of interest in pedagogy and in, as part of pedagogy, assessment. How do we assess what students know? How do we adapt our pedagogy, our teaching, to respond to what they need to learn? Fourth theme that we came across was that we found there were very varied views on our routine SLO reporting by student and section. That normally faculty at our college report on one section report on every section they teach for at least one SLO within that course and assessing each student individually. And this allows us to get disaggregated data um, not for SLOs by variables like race, ethnicity, first generation in college, et cetera, that we have through our banner, through our application process. The faculty don't break down that data by race, ethnicity, gender, but the research office can. So one success I'll credit as a success was given everything going on in the spring, all the chaos, and there being no requirement for faculty to assess during Springs 20, 28% of our faculty still did. So somewhere between a quarter and a third of our faculty still decided they wanted to do it. And by fall, we thought, oh, well, if we don't let them do it this time, how are we going to get them back in the habit? Well, in fall, we're already at more than 85% of our faculty having completed those assessments. So not really too bad of a gap there. In general, when we ask faculty, how important is routine SLO reporting to you and how important is it to your department? I collapsed here two different levels of, somewhat important, very important, somewhat unimportant, very unimportant. But basically, what we saw here, a trend, is that faculty think it's more important to their department than they think it is to them personally. Fewer people think it's unimportant to their faculty, to their department. More people felt like it's not so important to them personally. So to me, this is a call to the need to continue to find how do we make this routine assessment that's so important to our institutional assessment also useful to faculty individually and collectively for those teaching, say, a given class. How do we make this data they can use and that they value? But I was pleased to see that most people seem to think that their departments are at least 75% think their department is either neutral or finds it important. Some of the barriers that people had to reporting on SLOs, the biggest barrier far and away was personal time and energy in spring 20. And you can understand that given everything that was going on with the shift to remote, and everything else, the economic insecurity for our part-time faculty, the change in teaching children at home, all those things. Other barriers that were noted was students not being sufficiently responsive or available. For instance, a faculty member who said only 6 of my students turned in the assignment I had hoped to use for this assessment. Struggling to assess remotely to know that their assessments work in a remote way when it's the first time they've done it. And for some who were pretty data savvy saying, well, I think my data would be an outlier this semester. Everything is so strange this semester. I actually don't want that in my data set. I don't think it'll be helpful for me. Many, many faculty noted that they find value in assessment. So that was a nice thing to see, that they do assessment, that they find value in it. However, they find other forms of assessment, such as dialogue with other faculty in their department or their discipline, or self-reflection if they get to the end of the semester and think about what they're going to change for next semester. They generally find that more valuable to them than the routine SLO reporting we collect at the section and student level. And as a faculty coordinator, what I see here is we don't capture this data. We don't really have a systematic way to know what dialogue is happening or what kind of self-reflection or changes faculty are doing. And without adding a lot of burden to faculty whose workload has already exploded, it provokes me to think about how might we capture some of this. And the last area I'll cite is that faculty had a lot of experience around a lot of thoughts around connecting students to services in new ways, right? Our campus was closed. So in and outside of the classroom, faculty began to use social media. As one faculty member said, I go to the students where they are. So we have a queer resource center on campus. That's one of our student resource centers for, open to support specific populations. The coordinator of the queer resource center said, I put up a Zoom link, I put it on our website, nobody came. Then I started hanging out in Instagram and friending students I knew. And before you knew it, they were direct messaging me in Instagram and saying, I want to meet with you. I have to figure out what I'm doing next semester. And I had my appointment blocks filled up. A lot of faculty used videos and animations. Our career services did some amazing animations and videos, just short ones, under 5 minutes, around many aspects of looking for a job, picking a career, starting a resume, doing an informational interview. And we could see from the viewership of those that, they were reaching a lot of students. We set up virtual counters for registration, for financial aid, and for student services, where students could show up in a Zoom room and talk to somebody about what they needed. I think this was something that was very helpful, but it took a while and is still taking a while, I think, for students to get used to this mode of accessing students' services. So here is something too where faculty, where students might be talking to their classroom teacher, can play a role in saying, let me give you the link to the virtual counter. They're open this time. Do you want, even can I show up there with you and help you meet somebody there? Our library expanded our services to Spanish and Chinese languages by phone and through the chat room as well, I believe. Andrea, correct me if I'm wrong. So that really expanded our library access. You no longer had to get to the Chinatown campus to speak to a Chinese speaker. You could just, contact our library. And we developed curbside service so that students could come by to pick up a book that was on reserve and use it for 2 weeks. And then there was just a ton of personal outreach. I had faculty saying things like, well, I called everybody on my roster. I emailed students personally. I scheduled, I invited them to give me a time and their phone number that I could call them. Lots of personal encouragement and outreach to help keep our students engaged and help them be successful and help them access the services, even if it's not what we usually do. I don't usually provide referrals to rent assistance, but now I am. Our food drop, we usually have food shelves around campus where students can pick up a snack and a once a week grocery drop off on campus. So we had to figure out, where can you pick up a bag of groceries now, right? And just to note that equity barriers, as noted above, often remained in accessing services as well as classes. And for our non-credit students who may be limited English proficient and or elderly, they often found it harder to reach out or to get support. And the digital divides, have an impact. So those were the main things we found. I'm just at about halfway through our time. No, yeah, about halfway through our time. That's great. So we have a lot of time for discussion. I hope I don't talk too fast. I know I talk too fast, but I hope it wasn't too terrible for you. The first thing is just to ask you for any questions you have for us about this process and about what we found. And then we have a few questions for you. How are you identifying the impacts on, I have to hide you guys so I can read my questions, the impacts on assessment during the pandemic? And how are you addressing the impacts on equity? And what are you learning during this period that will serve you as you go forward? So just curious, and ask Andrea if she wants to say anything about what's in the chat, because I haven't looked at the chat.
Hi, there is one comment from Dawn Ward. At her institution, they use faculty reflections in the assessment data from eLumen to try to capture some of the conversations and thoughts around the assessments. And this can be helpful when looking back for annual planning and program reviews. And it's funny you should say that, Dawn, because we're just finishing our annual plans, are due at City College on the 1st. And this COVID report was very useful for some of the chairs to look at, to kind of re-engage with what everybody was going through, aside from talking to their individual faculty members. So that's good that you have it embedded in your assessment software.
Yeah, and I'll say our software also, we use Curricunet. There is a place where we invite faculty to reflect on their analysis of what they learned and what they'll do differently. And also when they do a aggregate assessment of a course or a program, to share any insights about the assessment process. And some of that data is definitely useful when updating a course. I think we have a little bit of a challenge that the data is inconsistent. So sometimes it's super useful and sometimes people just put an A in those boxes or don't answer the question. So the incentive for people to go back and read through the reports is inconsistent, right? And so sometimes there is data there, but it doesn't get rolled up as well as it might into our program review processes. And sometimes it is there and it is super useful. I had a faculty member in December contact me saying, I'm teaching a class I haven't taught before. How do I access the past assessment reports for that class? Because I want to see what the other faculty have said so I can address that. And I just thought, I was super excited that that's what they thought to do, that's how they were going to help orient themselves to the new class. Oh, yeah. Other questions, you can raise a hand or interrupt. I'm like, there are various cultures around Zoom conversations and I want to embrace all of them. Anything that you want to ask about what we did or what we learned or how we did it.
Or can we ask you, how did your college tackle assessment during spring 20? Did you suspend your requirement to assess SLOs on the section level? Was it difficult for your faculty to embrace the remote learning and assess their students remotely?
And I'm not sure if you guys have the power to just unmute yourself, but if not, raise a hand or something and Megan can unmute you. I'm going to stop share a minute because then I can see your faces a little better, if that's okay. Oh, I see. I wasn't even sure how many people were in the room because I couldn't see it. Now I see we're a nice sized group. Have you guys been thinking about how assessment changes given the pandemic, the shift to remote? Great. Grace Estrada, we suspended reporting a requirement and using the time to update curriculum and rebuild the house. I hear you. I changed all online assessments to low stake. My head still feels like a beehive. Yes, yes, I can imagine. That's a great way to handle the kind of the pressure that can sometimes lead students to cheating more, is that if everything is low stakes, I mean, they could still maybe have someone else do their assignments, but it's, why bother for 10 points, you know? And so sometimes that can be, in my experience, that can be helpful. We're assessing courses, but not focused on learning outcomes that would require lab demonstrations. That makes sense. Our biggest challenge was the shift to correspondence learning in our prison correspondence courses. Wow, mostly suspended all of these. Most other courses and faculty still assessed. With the prisons largely under lockdown to, you know, to control the assessment of, you know, the spread of the disease. I wonder if that had an impact on you, Dawn. I know in our college, we have classes we offer in the San Francisco jail, and those did move to correspondence, but I'm not sure how, I don't know how that turned out. Yeah, going from in-person to correspondence. Yeah. Man, I can just imagine that for prisoners who are, you know, on limited movement within the prison during the pandemic, getting a packet of materials in the mail for their correspondence class might be a really welcome distraction. So hoping to go back in fall 21, the students did well, that's great. We suspended requirements at Shasta, this is Sarah McCurry. for spring, but began again in fall as part of the apples to oranges data problem, given the shift from face-to-face to online during spring. Susan McLeod, I second your beehive comment. Faculty were doing incredibly heavy lifting and still are. I completely agree. And I don't know about you guys, but we've also experienced a decline in enrollment that has added to the
Janie, you got muted.
Oh my goodness.
I
I
don't
just
know.
realized I've been talking. Was I muted a long time?
No, just for a moment.
Okay, good.
I was trying to unmute everybody, but I'm having a hard time with that. I'm sorry.
It might be that only Megan can, I'm not sure. Yeah, I was saying that with enrollment down across the state at community colleges and quite particularly at our college, that has added to the sense of anxiety and stress that faculty are experiencing. Barstow College also held off on SLOs, but made sure to have office hours and live optional Zoom courses to communicate with students, give feedback, and work together to make higher learning outcomes. Great, great. Yeah, I think most of our faculty also had live office hours. And I was myself taking a poetry class last spring when we went from meeting every Tuesday, Thursday to meeting online. The online sessions became optional, but I saw that more than half the class still came. And for many of them, it was honestly a great source of psychological support, as well as keeping them engaged with their schoolwork, to just come and see other students every week. We had a student in that class who worked for Amazon and could no longer, because his hours doubled with Amazon growing, he could no longer make it to the Zoom classes, but he would call in while he's driving on his phone and just be like, I'm just listening while I'm driving and doing a drop off. And it felt good to know that the college meant enough to someone that that's what they wanted to do.
Janie, we have a good question right here. What are some faculty activities that could be offered to promote the culture of assessment on campus? And do we capture data at the student level and do demographic breakdowns?
Yeah.
Do
Well, one thing that comes to mind is our Office of Student Equity used the breakdown of student completion data and also some SLO data to do what they called their equity roadshow. They would meet with departments like at a departmental meeting and present to that department the data on their particular department and provide to faculty sometimes the data on their specific class so that we could see, for example, in I'm just going to make up the courses, but say a History 1 class had bigger equity gaps than a Psych 5 class. And because we have actually that'd be behavioral sciences and social sciences, and so then a poli-sci class so that they're in the same department. And that could lead to some discussion around how do you assess whether students know what they need to know? What do you think are the barriers that influence that change in student achievement or SLO outcomes? I really think we could do more though, because at least at our college, I think you all know we had a pretty spectacular accreditation crisis about 8 years ago now. And so for many of our faculty, when we implemented SLO reporting in a routine database way every semester for every section, many faculty experienced that as an external imposed requirement from outside, even though some departments had been doing SLO assessment all along. And many places around the state that were faculty led were encouraging SLO assessment. At our college, it was largely perceived as an outside imposition. I think we're still working to promote authentic assessment within the college, in ways that complement and maybe can be captured in the assessments that are done in the routine way. One thing also is that about Andrea, like 3 years ago, maybe, we tied the assessment process to our curriculum process so that faculty updating a course or a program, certificate or degree, had to do an aggregate assessment on that course or that program before they got their new version approved. with the idea that, you know, at this point in time when you're updating, you look back at how has this course performed on getting students to the outcomes we wanted? How am I going to tweak it? You know, if they got outcomes 1, 2, and 4, great, but not so much outcome 3, what additional assignment related to outcome 3 can I add? What additional content can I add so that my students are as successful there, right? So I think that's made some faculty look at assessment data a little bit more. Again, not uniformly. Andrea, do you have more to say on that?
I would say that departments that meet regularly, or classes where there's multiple instructors who teach the same class, who meet to discuss assessment, that seems to work. That seems to benefit the whole assessment process and cycle for most, and then it becomes more meaningful. So the more that is dialogue within courses, with instructors within a department, and sometimes cross departments, I think there's a better level of meaning is generated.
Yeah. And I throw the question out to you all. Are there things that you're doing that work to engage faculty more in discussing outcome data and equity? Focus on comparative streamlining with other campuses in the same district or nearby colleges.
That's an interesting question. I've never thought about that.
I can see how in a given district, you might want, say, a poli-sci 1 class to have similar performance across different colleges or similar outcomes. The way that we have, you know, in a department where a lot of different people teach the class, I think the focus on outcomes has brought us, our teaching styles are different, but we're getting students to the same outcomes a little bit more than maybe we used to be. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think also the CID process from the state for classes that are part of AST degrees, that has certainly created some comparability to transfer-oriented classes across the district, you know, across the state. And I imagine that also in certain CTE areas, like if the Board of Nursing wants things to be a certain way, it'll affect all the different campuses.
I think that the connection that a college has between the SLO coordinators and the curriculum committee is an important connection. Like at City College, the SLO coordinators work tightly with the curriculum committee, and we review course outlines. And so that connection helps to that connection helps with making sure that not the assessments, but the outcomes are standardized. Maybe that's something to think about. How can we take that a step further and look at the assessments of those outcomes more systematically?
You know, it occurs to me that one of the things we're missing in a virtual conference is the chance to sort of in the hallways between sessions, stop and chat with somebody who's not from your own college. And so if there aren't any more burning questions, I might suggest that we just go into breakout groups of 4 people-ish and chat like we would between sessions at a normal conference, if people would be interested in just having a more informal discussion around assessment in the time of COVID. How's that sound to folks? I guess if you don't like that idea, yeah, I see a hands up. Megan, would you be able to do that? Just put us into breakout groups of about 4?
Yeah, about how long do you want it to go for?
12 minutes. And while she's setting that up, I'll just see, is there any other experience of using assessment and addressing equity that people want to mention?
Janie, you've done an excellent job. I just wanted to comment. And being a student, I feel like I'm a student on this Zoom. I just I want to thank you for your time because this is valuable information for me. And I'll talk more about this. Our institution is so in flux with COVID, changing of management. We have a new VPI. We had 16 faculty member full time that retired, in the summer. So, and we don't have a system that's really, I guess you could say, interconnected. Whereas we have all instructors assessing on Canvas. Some of our instructors are still assessing in an old kind of an antiquated way, as well as institutional research and where they come in. I was interested, as you mentioned, your Canvas piece as academic senate president on our campus, really trying to combine that process. So I just wanted to say, you're not alone as you're facilitating. I just want to make sure that my comment brings value to the discussion because we're still so, and I shouldn't say behind the curve in a negative sense. I mean, COVID has
Yeah.
been just catastrophically
Yeah.
difficult for everyone.
Yes.
So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. I know I didn't say a whole bunch, but again, thank you for your efforts.
Henry, thank you so much. It gets very, it's lovely to hear the contrast of experiences, and to know that we're all in this together trying to figure out something that's, unprecedented. I'm in public health, so I'm going to tell you this is not the last pandemic we're going to experience in our lifetimes, but it is a really, really difficult one,
Wow. Yeah.
And so,
All right. Well,
um,
thank you.
yeah, let's go into the small groups just to talk a little bit more with one another. I think that might be enjoyable.
All right, I'll go ahead and let that go.
Hey,
Hey,
I'm losing my fucking mind. I couldn't get a session to start
ooh,
without closing everything else. Like you guys is closed,
uh-huh.
and I couldn't figure out what was wrong, but I finally figured it out. But I had a session that wasn't able to present.
Okay, well, they're in a breakout room right now for another 2 minutes.
Yeah. So I'm finally just calmed down. I thought I'll check and see what everybody else is doing.
I still have the recording going, FYI.
Okay, you're fine. I'm gonna leave. Oh, wait, hold on. Once I make you host, I'm leaving.
Is it working for your next one?
Yeah, I hope so. Well, yes, as long as I don't start any meetings, it should be fine.
Okay.
That was the thing. I had to start one because neither the presenter nor the moderators were part of Confer Zoom.
Oh, awesome.
So I had to start it and then let them in for the waiting room, make them co-hosts. And then I couldn't start anything. Nobody could start anything else because they're all in my account. So this other one, yeah. So the one that Ruth Ann was doing, yeah, said, "Oh, Susie's already got a meeting in progress. You want to end that meeting?" Yeah. So as long as I don't start anything, I should be fine. Fingers crossed.
Okay,
Thanks, Megan.
no problem. Let me know if I can help.
I think that was a fun way to end the meeting.
And I'll announce it again whenever everyone gets back, but there is going to be a link in the chat for a session evaluation survey that we have for this session if you would like to participate.
Thanks for putting the evaluation link in the chat. That's super helpful.
No problem.
So is that fun? Did you like talking to your peers? That's my favorite part of any conference.
Yeah, that was
Oh,
great.
Farouz, you're muted.
I enjoyed your presentation, and I did enjoy talking to my peer as well.
And I'll just give out a shout out to Dave Stevenson, who's on our SLO team. He's a graphic designer as well. So he has made our reports look a lot better. From the endless Google scroll to what looks like a very nice thing to skim through. So yeah, appreciate you all. I appreciate, it's going to be a long day. So I hope to see some of you in and out of other sessions. And
Janie,
mhm.
Janie, can you restate what the title we're supposed to use is? Because you said you named it something different. So my note says something different than what it says on the little form.
Probably whatever the form said is where you'll be able to find the
Oh,
slides, right? I was going to call it assessment in the time of COVID. I'm just going to put our
I'm looking for it
email
right
here
now,
too.
Jenny.
And, but you can, I think, what's it called on the breakout group? It's called
I'm
It's
looking
called
for it.
SLO assessment, data collection and analysis.
SLO assessment, data collection and analysis. I think I may have filled out the form wrong, or maybe the form got mixed up because there was when you put in your title that it also said, which strand do you think you belong in? And I clicked that strand, but then that became the title of the presentation. So when you look for a copy of these slides on their website, it'll probably be under that. But you can also look for my name, Janie Skinner, just like my grandmother. That was her name.
And I also put the link again in the chat to the report in case you want to take a look at that report again. It's in the
Great.
chat.
And if you want to save the chat, if you look in the chat box, like where you would write, there's 3 little dots and you can click save chat. So on the right-hand side where you would write in, you can click save chat.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. We do have further breakout sessions coming on in about 5 minutes here. So we look forward to seeing you all then.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.